Hi, thanks so much for joining us today. I want to welcome you to this webinar that is an introduction to ARPA funds. This is brought to you by the Berkshire Funding Focus, a coalition created to support Berkshire County businesses, organizations, and schools that are seeking federal and state funds for pandemic-related recovery and building organizational and sector capacity for the long term. At the end of today's session, I'll leave you with some information and contact details if you have further questions, and we invite you to continue exploring the Berkshire Funding Focus webpage as more resources are added. So here's a brief overview of how we're going to spend our time today. We'll start by looking at what ARPA is, who the funds are meant to support, and how communities will be investing across the state. Then we'll review some of the compliance and eligibility requirements for the grant if you're thinking about applying. Then we'll walk through some key considerations, the core nonprofit capacities and structures that either need to be in place or need to be developed in order to apply. And finally, once you have a better understanding of what's required, we'll talk about how this aligns with your organization's mission, values, your finances, and your expertise, and whether this is the right opportunity to pursue. And we'll leave you with some additional resources that are available and contacts of who you can reach out to for further information. So let's begin. ARPA, or the American Rescue Plan Act, is a federal stimulus bill. It was signed by President Biden in March 2021, and it's meant to aid public health and economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. So over $3 billion are going to cities and towns across Massachusetts. There's a recognition that many residents who are the most disproportionately affected by the pandemic are also those who have been impacted by centuries of systemic racism. So the funds are specifically meant to support those affected populations or businesses and organizations that operate within those qualified census tracts. So you might have noticed that certain towns have already received significant funding, and that's because those towns have a disproportionate number of people who were impacted by the pandemic, and therefore resources need to be directed to that town. The federal rules require that ARPA investments promote equitable outcomes. So this funding not only encourages small community-based organizations, schools, and small businesses to apply within the Berkshires, but it's also bringing you resources front and center to improve and change inequitable systems. So here's an overview of the core requirements for government RFPs, and you're going to need to demonstrate that your project is meeting these requirements. This information comes from the final rule, which is the official guidance and regulations provided by the U.S. Treasury. It outlines very clearly the enumerated eligible uses, and that means who and what they consider to be impacted and disproportionately impacted populations. The link here is at the bottom of the page, and I encourage you to visit the ruling for additional information. So the project you're proposing must respond to a public health emergency or a negative economic impact on an individual or group of people. So the categories within public health and negative economic impact are not limited. Services can range from COVID-19 mitigation and prevention, paying for medical expenses, improving mental health, preventing and responding to violence. It can also be for childcare or providing assistance to households and small businesses. So again, the type of service you provide is not limited as long as it benefits those who are disproportionately impacted. And there are a number of ways to identify disproportionately impacted households and communities. If you work with those who are considered low income, if you work with those within a qualified census tract, or if you operate within a qualified census tract, then you meet those eligibility requirements. Other impacted households would be those who are receiving federal benefits like SNAP or WIC, and those receiving services by a tribal government. So who's eligible to apply? Community-based organizations, nonprofits that have a 501c3 status, cultural organizations, schools, small businesses, If your organization or project doesn't have a 501c3 status, then you can consider partnering with another group or organization that does have this status, or consider a fiscal sponsorship. And we'll talk a little bit more about fiscal sponsorships shortly. And then the eligible types of funding. You can have a program, a project, or a capital expense. So examples of capital expenses might mean improvement, expansion, and rehabilitation to structures or facilities. So that's access and safety improvements, energy efficiency upgrades, expanding your facility to better or more safely serve impacted populations. And capital expenses are usually for long-term business needs. So the purpose is to make a major investment, to expand, or to upgrade. It's not the same as purchasing supplies for your day-to-day operations. If you have smaller supply purchases that are required, that would be part of your program expenses. So how to apply for funding? There are a few ways to apply. You can apply independently as an organization, a small business, or a school. You can apply under a fiscal sponsor. So that might be a comprehensive sponsor where the entire project is housed under a fiscal sponsor. And this would be appropriate for projects that aren't already registered 501c3s. Your fiscal sponsor would have reporting and oversight responsibility. So they would act as the legal entity and they would have financial control of the funds that are received. And your project would probably pay a fee to that sponsor. You can also partner with another organization, business, or school. It takes the burden off a smaller organization who might not have all the systems set up to meet the reporting and compliance requirements. And if you're looking to partner, the Berkshire Funding Focus has sample partnership agreements that you can use. So if you will be applying independently, here are a few considerations for your organization or business. First, we want to think about the people. So do you have the right staff to conduct the work that is going to be necessary? And that work might be everything from evaluations, outreach, reporting, and financial documentation. Next, the infrastructure and systems. Do you have the required policy and procedures already in place, or are you going to be creating them from scratch to meet compliance? Collaboration and relationships. Many of the applications, although not all of them, recommend working collaboratively with the community. So do you already have those relationships established within your community? And then finance. So this includes having the right systems in place, but also if you don't have those systems, ensuring that you're budgeting for what you're going to be doing in order to comply with the RFP requirements. So we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive to really understand what some of the compliance considerations and structures might need to be in place for your organization or business. And I want to note that not everything written here will be required on every RFP. This is also not an exhaustive list of all the requirements that might be required. You will need to read the requirements for each RFP that you want to apply to. From the RFPs that we've seen so far in the region, they contain a mix of requirements that I've listed here. So first, we have governance and written policy. Some applications might require that you have clear processes and procedures incorporated into your organization's written policies. So this might include recruiting and advancing qualified minorities, women, persons with disabilities, and may also include training programs and outreach efforts. Other policies we've seen include having a Title IX compliant status or a written code of conduct that covers conflict of interest within your organizations. And again, there are resources within the Berkshires that can assist you by providing templates if you're looking to add certain policies into your manual. Next, we have financial management processes and policies. So most government RFPs will look to see that you have strong financial management processes in place. So this will include an accounting system and protocols for financial management, which means having a system in place where invoices are created, where you track how costs are incurred, and where you process payments. To be eligible to receive funding, many applications will also want to see your financial reports or audits from previous years. Documentation and record keeping. Most applications also will be expecting that you have a system in place to track client data and report some of these metrics back. So thinking now about how you will keep track of who uses your services is important. Another consideration is that Massachusetts has very strong privacy laws, so ensuring that you have a safe and secure way to keep data is also important. Other things that might be required are time records, so keeping track of your employees and how much time they spend on each program they're delivering. Next, we have general reporting. So you can expect that you will need to complete quarterly reports, both financial reports that show your expenses or the costs that have been incurred that quarter. And you also need programmatic reporting. So just like I mentioned, what services did you provide? Who accessed your services? And you'll most likely have to submit an annual audit of your finances. So if your organization or business is small and it's not something you already budget for, you'll need to add this into your annual expenses. Finally, we're also seeing other legal requirements and expenses that are going to be incurred to meet compliance regulations. We've seen some RFPs require the organization, business, or school to have contractors' public liability insurance, property damage insurance, workman's compensation, vehicle liability insurance, or blanket fidelity bonds. You might already have these, but you also might have to increase the limit to meet those contractual obligations. So we recognize this is a lot of information and it's not meant to deter you. Not every RFP will require all of this, but we want those who are applying to this funding to know what the expectation might be. And again, there are resources available to assist you in creating some of these structures if they're not already in place. So as I mentioned, there are a few ways to apply for funding. And if you don't think you have the capacity to meet all of those compliance requirements, you might look at applying within a partnership. And that means you would work with another organization, business, or school on a project. Together, you would complete a budget and submit that for the RFP. And one organization, business, or school would act as the lead, and they would hold the accountability and responsibility for reporting and financing. So collaborating or partnering with another organization or business or school can have a lot of benefits. So first, there's the motivation of achieving economies of scale or cost savings. So the idea that organizations or businesses could potentially save money by sharing the cost of purchases, the shared use of transportation, shared expenses for a facility rental. And if you don't have all the structures in place to meet the compliance requirements, then you also share that burden. Another reason to collaborate or partner is because it advances your mission. Groups that collaborate have a greater reach to the community. It can result in a more holistic approach to serving the community. It also brings different knowledge bases and skill sets to the table. It really expands what you can offer without having to increase your budget. And finally, it provides that opportunity for innovation. It is also worth noting that it helps guard against risk. You can share the risk with another partner. So now that you have a sense of what the RFP might require, there's a bigger strategic question around whether you should pursue this funding opportunity, and does it align with your mission, your money, and your expertise? You know, government contracts require significant investments by an organization or business, not just financially, but also in administrative time, effort, and systems to comply with the contract. So consider the impact this grant will have on your organization and if the grant is really worth the effort and investments. A few questions to consider. Will the grant cover all the expenses to deliver your program equitably? If it doesn't, Do you have the reserves or other revenue to subsidize that deficit that you're going to incur? Are you prepared to invest in the systems necessary to comply with grant regulations? Federal and state grants require strict compliance for reporting, having processes and policies in place for your organization, and often infrastructure to track, measure your data and progress. Does the project you're proposing align with your core mission, your vision, and your values? I'm sure many of you have heard the term mission creep, and it's important to assess whether the program or project you're considering is really aligned with your values and purpose. Do you have the right number of staff and the right skills to deliver the work? Delivering the work means both the program delivery and the administrative requirements of grant writing, compliance, reporting, and evaluation. And if you answer no to any of these questions, consider who else can bring some of this value. Is there a partner that can help boost your capacity? Ultimately, we want to see organizations, businesses, and schools be successful in their applications, but we also want to see you be successful in meeting your compliance requirements. And we don't want groups to feel an unexpected burden after they receive funding. As I mentioned at the start, the Berkshire Funding Focus is here to support you, your organization, your business, or your school. And there are many resources available to help you, and we hope that you look at the webpage for some of this additional information. If you have questions, please reach out to the Recovery Grant Specialist, Karen Pelto, whose details are listed here on this page. And thank you for listening to this introductory webinar.